Thank you for tuning in to the Practical Preservation Podcast. Please take a moment to visit our website, practicalpreservationservices.com, for additional information and tips to help you restore your historical home. If you've not done so, please subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, or SoundCloud, and also like us on Facebook. Welcome to the Practical Preservation Podcast, hosted by Danielle and Jonathan Kepperling. Kepperling Preservation Services is a family-owned business based in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, dedicated to the preservation of our built architectural history for today's use as well as future generations. Our weekly podcast provides you with expert advice specific to the unique needs of renovating a historic home, educating by sharing our From the Trenches preservation knowledge and our guests' expertise, balancing modern needs while maintaining the historical significance, character, and beauty of your period home.
Today on the Practical Preservation Podcast, I have Michael Edison from Edison Coatings. Thank you for joining me today.
My pleasure.
So tell me about your background.
I received a degree in chemical engineering 48 years ago. It's a long time. And I started right out of school working for a very large engineering firm, which I quickly recognized was a big mistake. I guess I'm just not the kind of person who's well suited to sitting at a desk all day and processing paperwork. And so
Yes.
After just a few weeks, working in a big building full of engineers, I completely changed direction and went to work at a gypsum factory in Staten Island, New York.
Oh my goodness.
As a process engineer.
Yeah.
And that's really where I got started in construction products. Learned how to make plaster and paint and stuccos, and got to work in a fascinating industrial environment.
Yes. Yeah. That sounds interesting. My one of my good friends, they're both engineers. She's a civil engineer and he's a chemical engineer, but he's like a process engineer. So I to hear him talk, we could kind of see similarities in the things that we do with the processes and things like that. So that's interesting and it makes sense that you would then have a coating, finding ways to bake building materials. So what drew you into historic masonry? Restoration and preservation?
Well, it kind of just naturally evolved that way. I started this company 41 years ago, and initially our goal was to produce concrete repair and waterproofing materials, and it just so happened that we were working on a project in Stamford, Connecticut, doing repair on precast concrete panels. And the owner of the building, who was a banker, came up to us one day and said, "Gee, those patches are awfully ugly. Can't you do anything to make them look better?" And we sat there and said, "Well, yeah, we think we can." And we found the same red sand that they had used to make the panels in the first
Right.
place. Voila, we were suddenly in the custom repair business. And a short time later, an architect from New Haven stopped by and said, "I've been watching what you're doing and it looks really good. I have this historic brownstone building in New Haven that nobody knows what to do with. Do you think you could help us?"
Right.
And, that was our first landmark restoration project, where we developed a brownstone repair mortar that matched the original brownstone. And I'll say that it wasn't overnight that our focus became historic preservation.
Right.
It certainly opened the door to it.
Oh, definitely.
For a period of a few years, it became evident to us that was a really interesting niche that we could fill. And so that's
yeah. And those brownstones and some of those softer stones that they were using for buildings they don't hold up in the weather because they're so soft. So there really do need to be solutions for them.
Yeah. And unfortunately, a lot of the more traditional solutions were either very damaging in and of themselves or just not very durable.
Right. Yeah, because you have to get it to bond, but then you also have to deal with the protecting the original, the substrate at that point. Yeah, that seems like a challenge. So tell me about Edison Coatings.
Well, Edison Coatings is a company that I started, and we develop and manufacture a fairly wide range of products, all of which focus on stone, masonry, and historic concrete repair, protection, restoration. And the number of items in that toolbox continue to multiply as we encounter, all the unique challenges that historic preservation seems to throw us into.
Yes, I was impressed by your product list when I was preparing for this and going through your website, because you do like the stone repair like we discussed, but then you also have like the lime-based mortars, and you have the concrete repair, and some of the other coatings and things that like the waterproofing. So I was very impressed with the amount of products that you have on your website.
Well, thank you. I think what also makes us a little bit different is our focus on technical competence.
Right.
And so, for a small company, a disproportionate number of our staff members are degreed chemical engineers, and who understand why things are made the way they are, and
Right.
why they're being formulated to perform in certain ways. And in a matter of speaking, I've often said that even though we are a manufacturing company that gets paid for products that we produce, we really see ourselves as being a technical service business. And so I think that's the unique ingredient that we bring to the table. It's just, that level of competence, and also long corporate memory. I mean, we remember every mistake we've made for the last 40 years.
That's important. You have to learn from them.
That's absolutely.
So, well, are your clients typically then preservation professionals, or is that who you typically sell?
So I mean, it's a range of professional clients. Obviously, a fair amount of what we're producing is being made to fulfill the specification that's written by an architect or an engineer or a conservator. Some of them are government agencies. Our other customer base are restoration contractors. And so, between the specifiers, the large institutions, and the focused contractors, that's pretty much our foundation.
Yeah. And when you're talking about like the specifiers, do they come to you with a problem and then you create a solution? Do you work with them then that way?
That's not uncommon.
Okay.
I mean, having done what we do for as long as we have, there's obviously a certain recognition of who we are and what we can do within our little market specialty. But it's really common for an architect or an engineer to reach out to us and say, we've got this particular problem, send us pictures, send us photographs, if necessary, do site visits, and help them come up with a solution.
Yeah, that's really a valuable skill set. I'm assuming that you ship then nationwide. Do you ship internationally also, or?
So the lion's share of what we do is United States and Canada. We've definitely had some overseas projects in Europe and Australia, and we even sold a little bit of natural cement to the Chinese government. But primarily we're focused on the United States and Canada.
Yes. Okay. And I saw that you have training opportunities. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
So we believe strongly that training is in everybody's interest. There are just lots of things that you can easily avoid if you're aware of, where the potential pitfalls are in any process. And so we offer a variety of different ways for people to get training. We have always had restoration workshops at least once a year, sometimes more often, where people can come in and spend a day or two with us and actually get hands-on as well as classroom instruction in how to handle the key components in stone and terracotta repair, and also in historic repointing. Obviously, with COVID, that became a challenge last year.
Right.
We did our first all virtual one last year, and it was kind of interesting because people attended that who never would have come to Connecticut for training.
Oh, that's great.
And so we did that again this year, And now all of our training videos are available as an online course that people can sign up for. But we've also done other opportunities. We have trainers who will travel to a project site and train an entire crew, which on a major project I think is important.
Oh, yeah.
Because then everybody involved in the job is on the same page. They all have been through the same training. And then usually our trainer, in the process of teaching them how to use the materials, will also help them get through their mock-ups where they get the finishes right, they get the colors under control.
Right.
So it's a win-win for everybody.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Masonry matching, at least in my opinion, it's probably easier for people who do it often, but it seems to me like if you can send the sample and get an exact match and get the formula right, it's easy. But if you're trying to mix it on site, it's really hard to get a good match.
It's very hard to do it in a controlled fashion on site. And then there's also the issue of corporate memory. So it's not unusual for someone to call us and say, that project we worked on 20 years ago, well, we have a little more we want to do. Do you remember what you sold us?
Right.
And
yeah. Thankfully, you keep those records. Yeah. So what are the common mistakes that you see when people are working with historic masonry?
I think the most common places where things can go wrong are not unique to historic restoration. We have seen, for example, that in some cases the scope of work is incomplete.
Right.
Someone hasn't done the basic analysis of what the underlying problems are. And so that really doesn't help anybody. And that is something that still occurs to some extent, although I would say a lot less often than it did when we first began.
Thankfully.
Decades ago. Well, there's a lot of educational effort going on out there. And then I think it's up to responsible manufacturers to tell a client, I think you're overlooking something here. You really need to have your structural engineer look at this, and that's not us.
Right.
And so that's a common one. Some of the other things that we see is a misunderstanding of traditional versus contemporary materials and how they can or can't work together depending on the particulars. And so that's always a constant focus of our efforts is to actually get into the technology and explain how these things work and why in some cases you're better off staying with that traditional method and material, and in other cases that's just not going to work, and what would be an appropriate compatible alternative.
I think that's really important because I think that sometimes a modern solution is actually better than what was used at first, because sometimes the materials that they were using were inferior to the solutions we have now.
They didn't always get it right. That
Right.
certainly is part of it. Another consideration is that just because something worked 100 or 200 years ago as a new construction material doesn't mean that it's going to work today as a restoration material.
Right. Right.
And so those are the kinds of decision-making processes that we go through when making recommendations.
Yeah. So do you, I guess to avoid those, then it would be to talk to people who understand both sides, both the products and then also how the building works. Is that how you would avoid those mistakes?
Ideally, we're talking to someone who has, that foundation. In some cases, they're relying on our expertise, and that's fine. We try to be very even-handed in laying out what the options are in any particular situation, and what the pros and cons would be of any particular approach.
Yeah. Okay. And what trends and challenges do you see in preservation?
Well, I think there are two different areas that I would like to mention. And the first one is that there still seems to be, and I'll say still because I've been slogging through this industry for decades, but there still seems to be disproportionate reaction to things that have occasionally gone wrong. And I'm going to give you an example of that. Recently, the New York City Department of Buildings came to the conclusion that they would really rather see people replace their damaged terracotta than repair it. And that was based on some negative experiences with a competitive manufacturer's products not holding up. And we've never had that issue. And so
right.
it's to say, well, we shouldn't allow repair at all is a disproportionate response to the problem. So I guess if I were to step back and try to broaden what the nature of that issue is, it's that very often, we have people coming into these positions of decision-making authority who have very limited experience. And so they're just not focused enough on the details of how these things work to really make a properly balanced decision. So that's been a constant battle in preservation for a long time. If you think about preservation in general, it's a really non-homogeneous field. People coming into historic preservation with degrees in structural engineering, and you have other people coming into it with a degree in fine arts.
Yeah.
Well, I can talk color to the fine arts person, and I can talk calculations to the engineer. But there are lots of cases where decisions are being made that really are outside of the expertise of the person making those decisions.
Yeah.
So that's a challenge. That's a constant
that
challenge.
is a challenge.
Yeah. The other challenge, which I'll look at more positively, is that I think as an industry, everyone is focused on reducing carbon footprint. Cement industry in particular, and certainly as cement being a major component of what we use, we're sensitive to that too. And one of the more exciting things that have come along in our history is the ability to produce these low-fired natural cements.
Oh yeah.
Which generate half the carbon dioxide that Portland cement production does.
That's great. That's great, because I know, concrete is very hard on the environment, from the sand to the high temperature firing. So that's great that you can do that at a lower. And do you get the same strength out of it?
Well, you're not necessarily looking for the same strength when you're talking about masonry applications. So
right.
Portland cement is fabulous if you want to pour 6,000 PSI concrete.
Right.
You're trying to make a moderate to low strength masonry mortar.
Yeah.
Natural cement is actually a better material.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Is there anything that you thought of while we were talking that maybe you wanted to share that I didn't think to ask you?
Well, I mean, I would just reiterate that we're all in learning mode all the time. We all need to be in learning mode all the time. It's just as important to apply critical thinking to the technical decisions that we make as to the other decisions that we make about how we're going to go about our business and how we're going to run our lives. And we should always be open to new information. We should be skeptical of everything. That's good process.
Yes.
But, things are changing. And, a lot of things that were impossible 30 or 40 years ago when we first got started is mainstream today. And,
right.
You have to be able to distinguish between the things that are going to be a real contribution to the industry and things that are potentially going to come back to bite us.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that. We tend to, because we're not coming from a technical place, we tend to be very cautious recommending new products to people, because we want to see the track record before we started installing it.
That's very wise.
Yes. So did you have any offers for our listeners?
I do. And so what we're going to do is anyone who wants to sign up for our email list, which is not, super heavy on marketing, lots of technical content, that we will offer them $100 off a online training course.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. And can they sign up on your website? Is that where they would sign up, or?
What I would suggest they do is just reach out to me.
Okay.
And my email address is Edison Coatings, just like the company name, at outlook.com.
Delivery.
And then we can take care of both providing them with the coupon for the training course and also get them signed up.
Okay, very good. And then for our listeners to contact you, I know you gave the email. Should they also visit your website, or are there other?
There's a lot of technical content on the website
Okay.
by design. We try to make that as informative as possible. It's not marketing fluff. It's
Right.
guide specifications, technical data sheets, safety data, case studies, and there's a wealth of information there that we welcome people to take advantage of.
Okay, well,
And
very
that's
good. Well,
EdisonCoatings.com.
EdisonCoatings.com. Okay, very good. And I will make sure that also gets posted on our site where the website or where the podcast lives. Okay, well, very good. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate it.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Practical Preservation Podcast. The resources discussed during this episode are on our website at practicalpreservationservices.com/podcast. If you received value from this episode and know someone else that will get value from it as well, please share it with them. Join us next week for another episode of the Practical Preservation Podcast. For more information on restoring your historic home, visit practicalpreservationservices.com.